What would you do if the person who swore to love you forever abandoned you to die under the blistering Arizona sun? For Josephine Finch, a prim schoolteacher from Boston, this nightmare was her reality. Left with nothing but a tattered dress and a fading hope, she stumbled upon a man clinging to life by a thread, his body riddled with bullets, a bounty on his head. He was a stranger, an enemy to her world, yet in his eyes she saw not a savage, but the last embers of a dying nation. This isn't just a tale of survival. It's the true story of how an abandoned woman and a hunted prince found salvation in the cruelest of lands, and how their desperate alliance would challenge the very definition of justice in the Wild West. The heat was a physical entity, a malevolent spirit that pressed down from a bleached white sky and rose in shimmering waves from the cracked earth. Josephine Finch had long since stopped sweating. Her body had nothing left to give. Her tongue was a dry, swollen thing in her mouth, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. The memory of Sterling Wakefield's face was the only thing that burned hotter than the sun. His handsome patrician features twisted in a mask of panicked selfishness as he'd unhitched the last canteen from her saddle. His voice, a low, apologetic murmur that was more insulting than a shout. "It's better this way, Josie," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "One of us has to make it to Redemption Gulch. I'll send back help. I swear it." He didn't swear it. He lied. She watched him ride away on their only horse, a silhouette shrinking against the vast, indifferent landscape of the Arizona Territory. That was 2 days ago. Or was it 3? Time had become a meaningless cycle of scorching daylight and cool, terrifying nights filled with the cries of unseen creatures. Her elegant traveling dress, a fine wool garment wholly unsuited for this unforgiving world, was now a tattered, sun-faded rag. Her dreams of a new life as the wife of a prosperous land surveyor had evaporated, leaving behind the bitter grit of betrayal. Sterling hadn't just stolen their water and their horse. He'd stolen her future, leaving her to be erased by the elements. She was following a dry wash, a desperate gamble that it might lead to a spring or at least a pocket of shade among the skeletal mesquite trees and towering saguaros that stood like silent, judgmental sentinels. Her foot caught on a loose rock, and she felt the impact jarring through her exhausted frame. She didn't have the strength to rise. This was it, she thought, with a strange sense of calm. This was the end. Her father, a Boston physician, had always warned her of the untamed dangers of the West. She had dismissed his concerns as the overcautiousness of an old man blinded by Sterling's silver-tongued promises. As her vision began to tunnel, a dark shape on the periphery snagged her attention. It was huddled at the base of a cluster of rust-colored boulders, a place that offered a sliver of shade. A coyote, perhaps, waiting for her to finally still. She squinted, forcing her eyes to focus. It wasn't an animal. It was human. A primal fear, stronger than her exhaustion, jolted through her. She pushed herself up onto her elbows, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd heard the stories of renegades and bandits who roamed these wastes. But as she crawled closer, driven by a morbid curiosity that overrode her terror, she saw that the figure was no threat. He was a native man, lying face down in the dust. His back was a canvas of dried blood, the dark stains stark against his buckskin shirt, which was torn and riddled with holes. A single black feather was tied into his long, unbound hair, now matted with grime and blood. He was still unnervingly so. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the sun-hot skin of his neck. A pulse, faint, thready, but undeniably there. Every instinct screamed at her to run to conserve what little energy she had for herself. He was dying, Helping him would be a fool's errand, a waste of her final moments. He was one of them, the people Sterling had described with such casual contempt, the savages who stood in the way of progress. But as she looked at him, she didn't see a savage. She saw a human being brought as low as she was by the cruelty of this land. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, not the warning voice, but the teaching one, the one that had guided her hands as she learned to set a bone and stitch a wound. "You never turn your back on suffering, Josephine," he'd always said. "To preserve a life is the highest calling there is." Sterling had turned his back on her. She would not do the same. With a groan that was more determination than pain, she forced herself to her knees. She gently, carefully rolled the man over. His face was stark and angular, all high cheekbones and a strong jaw now slack in unconsciousness. A deep gash ran along his temple, and his breathing was shallow, punctuated by a rattling sound that spoke of broken ribs and damaged lungs. 3 distinct bullet wounds marred his chest and side. It was a miracle he was breathing at all. Her thirst was a raging fire, but a new purpose gave her a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She tore a long strip from the hem of her petticoat, the sound of ripping fabric loud in the profound silence. She had no water to clean his wounds, no medicine to stave off the infection she knew was already setting in. All she had was a sliver of shade and a stubborn refusal to let death claim them both without a fight. She pressed the makeshift bandage against the worst of the wounds on his chest, applying pressure. His body was lean and corded with muscle, but it was failing. He was burning with fever. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in brutal strokes of orange and purple, Josephine Finch sat in the dust. Her hand pressed against the chest of a dying stranger. A lone woman against the vast, unforgiving desert, holding back the tide of death with nothing but the tattered remnants of her petticoat and a sliver of inherited duty. The irony was not lost on her. Abandoned by the man who represented her civilized world, she was now the sole protector of a man her world deemed a barbarian. And in that desolate corner of the world, under the gaze of 1,000,000 emerging stars, their 2 desperate fates became irrevocably entwined. The first 48 hours were a waking nightmare, a blur of heat, thirst, and the man's delirious groans. Josephine named the cave the Sanctuary. It wasn't much, just a shallow overhang she'd found 1/2 a mile from where she'd discovered him, a recess in a rock face that offered deeper, more consistent shade. Moving him there had taken the last of her reserves, an agonizing process of dragging him mere inches at a time, his dead weight a testament to the life that was threatening to flee his body. Her thirst had become a living creature inside her, clawing at her throat. She knew that without water, they were both dead. On the second morning, driven by a desperation that bordered on hallucination, she stumbled out of the cave at dawn, following a line of hardy green shrubs she'd noticed. Her father had once told her that certain plants, deep-rooted and stubborn, only grew where some trace of moisture could be found underground. It was miles away. Her journey was a slow, painful crawl, but she found it. Not a spring, but a seep, a patch of damp, dark sand at the base of a cliff where water wept slowly from the rock. She dug with her bare hands, ignoring the pain as her nails tore and her fingers bled, until a small, muddy pool formed. The water was brackish and warm, but it was the most precious thing she had ever tasted. She filled her small, discarded leather satchel, a foolish remnant from her previous life that she couldn't bear to abandon. The leather leaked, but it held enough. The journey back was a race against the sun and the slow drip from her bag. When she returned, he was thrashing, lost in a fever dream. She knelt beside him, dipping a strip of her petticoat into the precious water, and pressing it to his cracked lips. He drank greedily at first, then subsided into a low murmur. He spoke in a language she didn't understand, the words guttural and rhythmic, full of pain and longing. She spent the days cleaning his wounds with the muddy water, a futile but necessary gesture. Infection was a rampant, angry red around the bullet holes. Using a small penknife from her satchel, and after sterilizing the blade in the flame of a small fire, she managed to start with a flint Sterling had overlooked. She probed the wound in his side. The bullet was lodged just beneath the skin against a rib. Her hands, which had once practiced fine embroidery and played the pianoforte, now became a surgeon's tools. Gritting her teeth, she worked the bullet free. The man screamed a raw animal sound that echoed in the tiny cave, and his eyes shot open. They were black. Not brown, but a deep, fathomless black that seemed to hold the darkness of the night sky. For a moment they were lucid, focused on her face, with a mixture of shock, confusion, and raw, primal hostility. Then his eyes rolled back, and he was lost to the fever once more. Days bled into one another. She foraged for anything edible, bitter roots she vaguely recognized from a botany book, the fruit of a prickly pear cactus that she painstakingly despined with her knife. Her diet was meager, but it was enough. She was a creature of the desert now. Her skin tanned and scratched, her fine Boston sensibilities scoured away by necessity. She learned the rhythms of her patient. She learned that the fever was worst at midday and broke in a torrent of sweat just before dawn. She learned that a cool, damp cloth on his forehead could soothe his tormented thrashing. She began to see not just the wounds, but the man beneath them. His hands were calloused, but his fingers were long and elegant. A series of faded white scars crisscrossed his arms, old stories of battles fought and won. Around his neck on a leather thong was a pendant made from a piece of smooth, sun-orange stone etched with a spiral symbol. It seemed to glow with its own internal warmth. One afternoon, as she was changing his dressing, he spoke, not the delirious rambling from his fever dreams, but a single clear word in English. Water. He rasped his voice, rough as gravel. Josephine startled, dropping the cloth. She scrambled for the water satchel, her heart pounding. She lifted his head, holding the bag to his lips as he drank. He coughed, and she gently lowered him back down. His eyes were open, and this time they were clear. The hostility was gone, replaced by a weary, profound exhaustion. He studied her face, his gaze taking in her torn dress, her sunburned skin, her matted hair. He managed the single word, a great effort. "My name is Josephine Finch," she said softly. "I found you. You were shot." His gaze sharpened, a flicker of the warrior returning. He tried to sit up his hand, instinctively going to his side, where a knife would have been. He found nothing. A wave of pain washed over him, and he fell back with a gasp. "Easy," Josephine cautioned. "You've been near death for days. The bullets are out, but the fever is still strong." He closed his eyes, a muscle working in his jaw. Betrayal. Defeat. She could see the emotions warring on his stoic features. He didn't speak again that day, but the barrier had been broken. He was no longer just a body to be tended. He was a person aware and watching. Over the next week, he began to heal. The fever slowly receded, and he started taking more water, then chewing the tough roots she brought him. They existed in a space of near silence, punctuated by his single-word requests and her brief answers. Yet a silent communication grew between them. She learned to read the tightening of his jaw as a sign of pain, the slight widening of his eyes as surprise. He in turn watched her every move with an unnerving intensity, from the way she carefully managed their water supply to the grim determination with which she hunted for food. One evening, as the fire cast dancing shadows on the cave walls, he pointed a shaky finger at the orange stone around his neck. "Sunstone," he said, his voice stronger now. "For my people, the people of the Sunstone." Josephine looked at the stone, then back at his face. "Your people, where are they?" A shadow passed over his features, a grief so profound it seemed to steal the air from the cave. "Gone," he whispered. "Scattered. Hunted." He looked at her, his dark eyes seeming to pierce through to her soul. "My name is not my name. To you I am stone." The name suited him. He was as hard and unyielding as the rock that surrounded them, yet like the pendant he wore there was a warmth hidden deep within. "I am Josephine," she repeated gently. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Josephine," he said, tasting the name. "You fight like a trapped mountain cat. Why are you here? This is no place for a woman of your kind." The question brought the memory of Sterling rushing back, sharp and painful. "I was left," she said, her voice tight, "betrayed. Same as you, I suspect." For the first time, a flicker of something akin to understanding crossed his face. He held her gaze for a long moment, and in that shared look of betrayal, a fragile, unspoken alliance was forged. They were two ghosts in a hostile land, a Boston schoolteacher and the last son of the Sunstone people, both abandoned, both hunted, and both stubbornly, inexplicably alive. Survival in the cave was a precarious day-to-day existence, but it was a world they had come to understand. The outside world, however, could not be kept at bay forever. Their meager supplies were dwindling. Stone was healing, the angry redness of his wounds was fading, and he could now sit up on his own for short periods, but he needed more than bitter roots to regain his strength. Josephine knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she would have to go to the town Sterling had been aiming for, Redemption Gulch. The thought terrified her. She was a woman alone, disheveled and wild-looking. She had no money, nothing to trade but the gold locket around her neck, a gift from her mother that was her last link to the life she had lost. "I must go," she told Stone one morning, her voice betraying none of the fear coiling in her stomach. "To the town. For food. For salt medicine." He was sitting with his back against the cave wall, patiently sharpening her small penknife on a smooth river stone. He paused, his dark eyes fixing on her. "This town. It is a place of iron bars and hanging ropes. They will not be kind to you, or to me if they find me." "They won't find you," she said firmly. "I will hide the entrance with brush. I will be careful. But if you are to heal fully, I have no choice." He studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. "There is a weakness in these people," he said, his voice low. "They see what they expect to see. A lone woman frightened. They will not see the mountain cat inside." He handed her the newly sharpened knife, but a cat must have claws. She took the knife, its familiar weight now feeling far more significant. Before she left, he gave her one final piece of instruction. He took a piece of charcoal from the fire pit and a flat piece of stone. He drew a symbol, a circle with a jagged line, like a lightning bolt through it. "Find a man named Peterson, an old trader. He sometimes deals in curiosities. Show him this sign, say nothing else. He may help. He may put a bullet in you. He owes my father a life debt, but such debts are easily forgotten." With that grim warning, a small parcel of roots and her mother's locket tucked into her bodice, Josephine set out for Redemption Gulch. The journey took a full day, a grueling trek under the relentless sun. When she finally saw the town, It was a collection of ugly, unpainted wooden buildings squatting in the dust, a scar on the face of the landscape. A single main street was flanked by a saloon, a general store, a sheriff's office, and a handful of other dilapidated structures. Men stopped and stared as she walked down the street, their eyes lingering on her torn dress and sun-darkened skin. Their gazes were a mixture of contempt and crude appraisal. She kept her eyes forward, her chin held high, channeling a confidence she didn't feel. Her first stop was the general store, a dim, cluttered space that smelled of coffee beans, dust, and cured meat. The proprietor, a portly man with a greasy apron and suspicious eyes, watched her like a hawk as she gathered what she could afford, a small sack of flour, a slab of salt pork salt, and a bottle of carbolic acid for cleaning Stone's wounds. She approached the counter and placed the locket on the worn wood. "This is all I have," she said, her voice steady. The man whose nameplate identified him as a Mr. Hobbs picked up the locket, his thick fingers fumbling with the clasp. He opened it, looked at the miniature portrait of her mother inside, and then at Josephine. "Fine piece," he grunted, his eyes calculating its worth. "Came into some trouble, did you?" "My husband and I were waylaid by bandits." She lied the story she had rehearsed, falling easily from her lips. "He went on to Fort Grant for help. I am to wait for him here." Hobbs grunted again, seeming to accept the tale. He pushed the supplies toward her, keeping the locket. "This covers it." "Barely." As she was about to leave, her eyes fell upon a notice nailed to the wall near the door. It was a wanted poster. Her blood ran cold. The sketch was crude, but the high cheekbones, the strong jaw, and the intense eyes were unmistakable. It was Stone. "Wanted 500 reward, dead or alive, for murder and depredation. Apache war chief, known as Ghost of the Canyons." $500. Hobbs said, noticing her gaze. "Big bounty. Sheriff Brody and his boys have been scouring the hills for him and his band for a month. Word is a posse of bounty men caught up to them last week over by the Black Creek. Shot most of them to pieces. Brody figures the chief is either dead in a ditch or long gone to Mexico by now." Josephine felt a wave of dizziness. Ghost of the Canyons. A war chief. Not just a man, but a leader. The weight of the secret she was keeping settled upon her heavy and terrifying. She forced a nod, grabbing her supplies. "Let's hope they got him." She said the words, tasting like ash. She fled the store, her heart hammering. She needed to find the trader Peterson. She asked a woman shaking a rug outside a boarding house for directions to a trader, and was pointed toward a dusty, cluttered shop at the very edge of town, more of a shack than a store. The inside was a chaotic jumble of goods furs, native pottery mining equipment, and old firearms. An old man with a long white beard and startlingly blue eyes looked up from behind a counter where he was mending a saddle. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. Josephine's throat was tight. She remembered Stone's words. "He may put a bullet in you." Taking a deep breath, she walked to the counter, took out the piece of charcoal Stone had given her, and drew the symbol on the dusty wood. She said nothing. The old man's eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. He stared at the symbol. Then his gaze shot to her face, sharp and penetrating. He glanced around the empty shop, then leaned forward. "Where did you see this?" He whispered, his voice urgent. "A man sent me," she whispered back. "He is hurt, badly, hiding in the hills." Peterson's face was a mask of conflict. He ran a hand over his tired face. "The son of burning sky," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "They said he was dead." He looked at her again. "Burning sky saved my life in a flash flood 30 years ago, pulled me from the water when my own partners left me to drown. A debt is a debt. He moved quickly, grabbing a heavy canvas sack. He filled it with dried jerky, a pouch of medicinal herbs, bandages, and a small tin of salve. "This is all I can do," he said, pushing the bag towards her. "The town is crawling with bounty hunters. Sheriff Brody is a hard man, but fair. The man leading the hunt, a man named Cortland, is not. He's a venomous snake. If he learns the chief is alive, he will tear these hills apart to find him." He pressed a small, heavy pouch into her hand. "Coins. Don't use them all at once. Be invisible. And tell the son of burning sky. Tell him the debt is paid. Now get out of here before you bring trouble down on us both." Josephine left the shop, her mind reeling. The danger was no longer an abstract threat. It had names Sheriff Brody Cortland and a price tag of 500 dorsals. As she hurried down a dusty alleyway, a voice from the saloon's doorway made her freeze. "Well, I'll be. I thought the coyotes would have picked your bones clean by now." She turned slowly, her blood turning to ice. Leaning against the saloon doors, a smug, cruel smile on his handsome face, was Sterling Wakefield. Seeing Sterling was like being plunged into ice water. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the town fading to a dull roar in her ears. He looked prosperous, his clothes clean, his face clean-shaven. He had not, she noted with a venomous clarity, suffered in the slightest. "Josephine," he said, pushing himself off the doorframe and taking a step towards her. He had the gall to look pleased with himself. "I knew you were resourceful. When you didn't turn up dead on the trail, I figured you must have made it here." "You left me to die?" she said, her voice low and trembling with a rage she hadn't known she was capable of. The bag of supplies from Peterson suddenly felt immensely heavy. Sterling's smile faltered. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Now, Josie, let's be reasonable. It was a terrible situation, a survival situation. I did what I had to do. I was coming back for you, I swear. I was just gathering resources." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it stole her breath. "You were gathering resources in a saloon." She shot back, gesturing with her head toward the batwing doors. His eyes hardened. "You should be grateful. I'm a forgiving man. We can put this behind us. We can do nothing," she interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "You are a coward and a liar, Sterling Wakefield. Stay away from me." She turned to leave, but he grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't you walk away from me, Josephine. You have no one, no money. You need me. Let go of me," she hissed, trying to wrench her arm free. Just then, two men emerged from the saloon. One was a tall, imposing figure with a silver star pinned to his vest, Sheriff Brody. He had a stern, weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. The other man was leaner with a predatory stillness about him. He had cold reptilian eyes and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. This, she guessed, with a sickening certainty, was Cortland the bounty hunter. "Everything all right here, Wakefield?" the sheriff asked, his voice a low drawl. Sterling immediately released her arm, his demeanor shifting to one of polite deference. "Just a small misunderstanding, Sheriff. This is Miss Finch, my former fiancée, a little overwrought from her journey." Cortland's cold eyes swept over Josephine, lingering on her ragged appearance. He smirked. "Looks like she's been sleeping in a ditch. You have rough taste in women, Wakefield." Josephine's face burned with humiliation, but she held her tongue. She could not afford to draw any more attention to herself. "Miss Finch?" Sheriff Brody said, his gaze more discerning than Cortland's. "This man troubling you?" She had a choice. She could scream the truth, expose Sterling for the monster he was. But what then? It would be her word against his. She would become a town spectacle, a problem, and scrutiny was the last thing she needed. She had to get back to Stone. "No, Sheriff," she said, forcing a calm she did not feel. As he said, a misunderstanding. "The heat has made me irritable." Brody grunted, seemingly unconvinced, but unwilling to press the matter. "See that it stays that way. Redemption Gulch is a quiet town. I aim to keep it that way." He gave Sterling a final hard look before moving down the street. Cortland, however, lingered. He looked from Sterling to Josephine, his smirk widening. "So you're the one he was with. He told me his partner died on the trail. Looks like he was mistaken." He leaned in closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Wakefield here was part of my posse, a map reader. Led us right to the Ghost's little war party. Shame his nerve broke when the shooting started. He ran like a scalded dog." The world tilted on its axis. Sterling hadn't just been in the area. He had led the bounty hunters to Stone. His betrayal was deeper and darker than she could have ever imagined. He had been complicit in the slaughter of Stone's people. Sterling's face went pale. "That's not... I was just a guide, Cortland." "Whatever you say." The bounty hunter sneered before turning his attention back to Josephine. "If you're looking for work, the saloon's always hiring girls. Seems to be your station in life now." He laughed a dry, rasping sound and followed the sheriff. Josephine stood frozen, her mind racing. Sterling, seeing her expression, took a step back. "Josie, I can explain." "You led them to him," she whispered, the horror of it dawning on her. "The people you killed. You did that. They were savages. It was a job for the bounty." He stammered, his composure finally cracking. "Cortland promised me a share." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw nothing but a hollow shell of a man rotten to the core. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the street. She didn't look back. Every step she took was filled with a new, terrifying urgency. Cortland and his men had wiped out Stone's band. They believed Stone was dead. But Sterling knew she had been out there. If he got drunk enough or scared enough, what might he say? What might Cortland piece together? Her journey back to the cave was a frantic scramble. She didn't stop to rest her mind, consumed with the image of Cortland's cold eyes and Sterling's weak, treacherous face. She was no longer just a nurse to a wounded man. She was the guardian of a secret that could get them both killed. The wanted poster, the $500, Sterling's presence in town, it had all converged into a perfect storm of danger. She arrived back at the sanctuary near dusk, breathless, and covered in dust, her hands raw from clutching the heavy bag. She pushed aside the brush covering the entrance and slipped inside. Stone was waiting, sitting upright. He had a large rock in his hands, ready to use as a weapon. He relaxed when he saw it was her. "You were gone long," he said, his eyes searching her face. "You saw something." She sank to the ground, the supplies tumbling from the bag. "Worse," she said, her voice shaking. "I saw him. The man who left me. He's in the town." She looked up, meeting Stone's intense gaze. "He was your guide. He led the bounty hunters to you." The silence in the cave was absolute. The firelight flickered across Stone's face, revealing no shock, only a profound, ancient weariness. He had seen so much betrayal that this final cruel twist seemed almost inevitable. "There is a name for men like him," Stone said quietly. "He is a Narcuse, a man with no soul. He walks in the sun but casts no shadow." He looked at the supplies she had brought, the real food, the bandages, the medicine from Peterson. "You did well, Josephine Finch. You have the heart of a warrior. But now the ghost from your past has returned. and his shadow falls upon us both. The knowledge that Sterling was in Redemption Gulch, entangled with the very men who wanted Stone dead, changed everything. The sanctuary no longer felt safe. Every gust of wind, whistling through the rocks, sounded like approaching footsteps. Every shadow seemed to hold the form of a hunter. Josephine found herself sleeping in short, fitful bursts, waking at the slightest sound, the sharpened penknife always within reach. Stone, however, seemed to draw a strange strength from the heightened danger. With the jerky and proper medicine from Peterson, his recovery accelerated. The gaunt, haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a familiar intensity. He began to move around the cave, his steps still stiff but growing surer each day. He would spend hours at the cave mouth, concealed behind a rock, watching the vast expanse of the desert with an unnerving patience, reading the movements of distant birds and the direction of the wind as if they were pages in a book. "He will come," Stone said one afternoon, not taking his eyes from the horizon. "Sterling?" Josephine asked, pounding dried roots into a coarse flour. "The bounty hunter." "Cortlandt," he corrected. "A man like that does not leave a bounty of that size to chance. He will not believe I am dead until he holds my scalp in his hand. Your man, the one with no soul, is a loose end, a weakness. Cortlandt will either use him or discard him." The calm, factual way he spoke of his own potential death sent a shiver down her spine. "What do we do?" she asked. For the first time since she'd met him, Stone turned his full attention away from the desert and onto her. "Before you were helping a dying man. Now you are hiding a war chief. The price for that is a rope. You should leave Josephine, go back to the town. Tell them you are lost. They will believe you. You can still save yourself." She stopped her work, looking at her hands, which were now calloused and stained, so different from the hands of the woman who had left Boston. "And what would you do?" "I will do what I must," he said simply. My journey was not finished. He rose and walked to the back of the small cave, retrieving a leather bundle she hadn't noticed before, tucked deep within a crevice. He unrolled it carefully on the ground. It was a piece of cured deer hide, and painted on it with natural pigments was a map. It wasn't a map of roads or towns, but of natural landmarks, a triple-peaked mountain, a river that forked like a serpent's tongue, a canyon shaped like a crescent moon. My father Burning Sky was a great chief. Stone began his voice, taking on a storyteller's cadence. He saw the future. He saw the iron rails and the endless tide of new people. He knew our world was ending, but he did not believe our people had to end with it. He traced a line on the map with his finger. For years he searched for a place hidden from the world, a valley protected on all sides by impassable cliffs, fed by a warm spring that never freezes where the grass is always green, a place to begin again. He called it Ardalohi, the Valley of Whispering Water. He looked up at her, his eyes burning with a desperate fire. He found it. This is the map. My father died before he could lead our people there. The duty fell to me. The 30 warriors who rode with me were not a war party. They were fathers and sons, the last of the Sunstone people trying to reach a new home. We were betrayed not only by your Sterling, but by one of our own. A scout paid with whiskey and promises led Cortlandt to our trail. The weight of his secret finally descended upon her. He wasn't just a fugitive. He was a leader, a shepherd for a lost flock. He wasn't running from a crime. He was running toward a future. The $500 bounty wasn't just for a man. It was for the destruction of a dream. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because you have earned the truth," he said. "And because if I fall, The dream of whispering water dies with me. The map is useless without the knowledge of how to read the final passage, a series of caves that are not on the map. The secret is in my mind. She looked from the map to his face, and in that moment she made a choice. It wasn't a conscious decision, but a deep instinctual alignment of her fate with his. To abandon him now would be a betrayal on par with Sterling's. It would be to surrender the small, fierce piece of herself she had discovered in this desert, the part of her that was a survivor, the part that her father would have called honorable. "You said it yourself, Stone," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I have the heart of a warrior, and warriors do not abandon their chiefs in the field of battle." A slow smile touched Stone's lips, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows of pain and grief, if only for a moment. "I knew there was a mountain cat inside you, Josephine Finch." The dynamic between them shifted. She was no longer just his nurse. He was no longer just her patient. They were partners bound by a shared secret and a common enemy. He began to teach her. He showed her how to read the subtle signs of the desert, how a disturbed pebble could indicate a man's passing, how the flight of a hawk could reveal the location of water. He taught her how to move silently, how to use the terrain for cover, and how to make a smokeless fire. In turn, she told him of her world. She described the crowded streets of Boston, the vastness of the ocean, the books filled with poetry and science. She told him about her father, the physician, and the principles of medicine he had taught her. He listened with an insatiable curiosity, asking sharp, intelligent questions. He was fascinated by the idea of knowledge being kept in books, so different from his own people's tradition of oral history, passed from one generation to the next. They were two different worlds colliding in a dusty cave, finding common ground. But even as their bond deepened, the shadow of redemption. Gulch loomed larger. They knew they could not stay in the cave forever. Cortland was out there, and Sterling was a ticking time bomb of cowardice and greed. "We need to move," Stone said one evening as he studied the map, "but I am not yet strong enough to make the journey to the valley. My leg, the bullet damaged the bone more than I knew." He had a pronounced limp one that would make a fast escape impossible. "Then we make a stand here," Josephine said, her resolve hardening. "This is our ground. We know it better than they do." A stand. Stone looked at her, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "Against armed men. We have a penknife and a rock." "We have more than that," she countered, her mind, trained in logic and reason, already working on the problem. "We have the element of surprise, and we have this." She touched her temple. "My father taught me about more than just medicine. He taught me chemistry. He was fascinated by it. He showed me how to make things burn." She was thinking of a passage in one of her father's old textbooks about the volatile nature of fine, dry dust when mixed with certain flammable substances. She looked at the pouches of herbs Peterson had given them, some of which were oily and resinous, and then at the fine, powdery dust that covered the floor of the cave. An idea wild and dangerous began to form in her mind. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble born of a Boston education and a desert desperation. Stone watched her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "The mountain cat shows her claws," he murmured. "Tell me more about this." Boston fire. The waiting was the worst part. For 3 days they lived in a state of heightened alert, preparing for a battle they both knew was inevitable. Josephine, using knowledge gleaned from her father's books, worked with a grim focus. She ground handfuls of a sulphurous yellow rock she found near the seep into a fine powder, mixing it with the driest, most flammable herbs from Peterson's bag and fine charcoal dust from their fire pit. The resulting mixture was a volatile, dark grey powder. It was a crude, unstable concoction, but she knew it would be highly flammable, especially when dispersed as a fine dust cloud. Stone, meanwhile, did not rest. Despite the pain in his leg, he fortified their position. He showed Josephine how to brace loose rocks above the narrow path leading to their cave, creating a small, precarious rock slide that could be triggered by cutting a single rope of plaited yucca fiber. He found a secondary escape route, a narrow, chimney-like fissure at the back of the cave, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, that led to a ledge high up on the cliff face. It was a dangerous climb, but it was a chance. They worked mostly in silence, a seamless partnership, born of mutual respect and a shared will to survive. The teacher and the war chief preparing their deadly lesson. The attack came, as Stone predicted it would, at dawn on the fourth day. A hawk's sharp cry from high above was their first warning. Stone, who had been keeping watch, went instantly still. "They are here," he whispered, his voice calm. "Two of them. One stays with the horses. One comes on foot." Josephine's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. She looked at the pouches of grey powder she had prepared, her hands suddenly clammy. "How do you know? The hawk would not cry so if a coyote were on the prowl. It warns of a two-legged hunter," he explained, his eyes fixed on the path below. "He moves foolishly with too much confidence." It was Cortland. She knew it instinctively. He would come alone, wanting the entire bounty for himself. Peering through a crack in the rocks, she saw him. He moved with a hunter's grace, a rifle held loosely in his hands, his cold eyes scanning the terrain. Her breath caught in her throat. Tethered to a tree further down the wash, she saw two horses, and standing beside them, looking nervous and out of place, was Sterling Wakefield. Cortland was using him as a sentry. "He is yours," Stone said quietly, nodding towards Sterling. "The one who casts no shadow. My fight is with the hunter." The plan was simple and desperate. Josephine was to take their remaining water and supplies and make for the escape route at the back of the cave. Stone would wait for Cortland to enter the narrow passageway leading to the cave's mouth. Her signal would be the rock slide. Once Cortland was trapped, Stone would deal with him. "No," Josephine said, her voice firm. "We do this together." Stone looked at her, his expression unreadable. "This is not your fight." "You made it my fight when you told me about whispering water," she countered. "I will not run." There was no time to argue. Cortland was getting closer. He'd found their tracks leading from the seep. They took their positions. Stone flattened himself in an alcove just inside the cave entrance, a heavy, sharp-edged rock in his hands. Josephine crouched near the yucca rope that held the rock slide in place, her homemade powder bombs, the grey dust sealed inside small pouches made from her petticoat at her side. The crunch of Cortland's boots on the gravel path was terrifyingly loud. He paused at the base of the final approach, his rifle raised, scanning the cave entrance. He was cautious, sensing a trap. For a heart-stopping moment, Josephine thought he would turn back. Then his greed must have won out. He began to climb the narrow path. The moment he passed beneath the balanced rocks, Josephine sliced the yucca rope with her knife. The sound was a deafening roar as tons of rock and gravel cascaded down, completely blocking the path. Cortland spun around, cursing as dust and pebbles rained down around him. He was trapped between the rock slide and the cave. He whirled back toward the cave, his face a mask of fury, and fired his rifle into the darkness. The shot ricocheted off the stone walls with a vicious whine. "Come on out, Ghost!" he bellowed. "Nowhere left to run." That was Stone's cue. He lunged from the shadows, not with a warrior's cry, but with the silence of a predator. He brought the heavy rock down on Cortland's rifle, smashing the wooden stock and knocking the weapon from his grasp. Cortland roared in pain and surprise, but he was fast. He drew a long-bladed knife and spun to face Stone. The fight was brutal and primal. It was the raw strength of the bounty hunter against the wounded, but desperate cunning of the chief. Cortland was bigger and stronger, but Stone was quicker, using the tight confines of the passage to his advantage. A knife blade flashed, and Stone cried out, stumbling back with a deep gash on his forearm. Josephine knew she had to act. Cortland was pressing his advantage, forcing Stone back towards the cave mouth. She lit the makeshift fuse on one of her dust pouches, a piece of dried cloth soaked in resin, and threw it overhand. It landed on the ground between the two men. It sputtered for a second, then erupted in a blinding flash of light and a whoosh of flame igniting the dust in the air. Cortland screamed, shielding his eyes as the flash fire seared his face. The momentary distraction was all Stone needed. He lunged forward, ignoring the pain in his leg and arm, and drove his shoulder hard into Cortland's chest. The bounty hunter, blinded and off balance, stumbled backward. His heel caught on a loose stone. For a second, he teetered on the edge of the newly formed precipice created by the rock slide. Then, with a cry of disbelief, he fell, vanishing into the cloud of dust below. The silence that followed was broken only by a sickening thud. Panting, bleeding Stone leaned against the cave wall. Josephine rushed to his side, tearing another strip from her ruined dress to bind his arm. "Your Boston fire," he breathed, a look of awe on his face. "It burns bright." But they had no time for relief. A new sound reached them, a frantic scrabbling from below. Sterling. He had seen the rock slide, heard the fight. He was trying to climb the unstable scree. "Josephine, are you up there?" "What happened?" he yelled, his voice thin with panic. Stone looked at Josephine, his expression grim. "The man with no soul. He cannot be allowed to return to the town." Josephine looked down the path. She could see Sterling's head appearing over the edge of the rock fall. His face was pale with terror. He was not a threat. He was just a pathetic, weak man. But he was a man who knew their secret. She picked up another of her powder pouches. She could end this right now. One more flash of Boston fire, and Sterling Wakefield would trouble them no more. Her hand trembled. She thought of his betrayal, of the days she had nearly died of thirst, of the men he had led to their deaths. Then she looked at Stone, at the leader who fought to save his people, not just to kill his enemies. She looked at her own hands, the hands of a healer. She lowered the pouch. "No," she said, her voice resolute. "We are not murderers. We are survivors." She stepped to the edge of the precipice. "Go away, Sterling," she shouted down. "If you ever come back, if you ever speak a word of what you saw, I will hunt you down. There is nothing left for you here. Go." He stared up at her, at the wild, fierce woman she had become, and for the first time he looked truly afraid of her. He scrambled backward, slipping and sliding down the rocks, and fled, running back towards the horses and the town without a single look back. He cast a long, lonely shadow as he ran. Stone had been wrong about one thing. Even a man with no soul could cast a shadow in the setting sun. The victory over Cortland was fleeting. With Sterling fleeing back to town, the sanctuary was compromised. Their only escape was an agonizing climb through a narrow fissure at the back of the cave. For 2 days they trekked across the high mesas, Stone leaning heavily on Josephine, until a lone rider intercepted them on an open plain, Sheriff Brody. There was nowhere to run. Brody held the wanted poster, his face grim. "Wakefield came back," he stated. "Told a wild tale." Josephine stood her ground, her voice ringing with defiance. She defended Stone, exposing Sterling's cowardice and Cortland's bloodthirsty hunt. Stone then spoke not as a fugitive, but as a leader trying to save his people. He told Brody of their desperate search for a new home, a mission of survival, not of raiding. The sheriff listened, his weathered face unreadable. He had seen Cortland's body and the terror in Wakefield's eyes. The story he'd been told in town was a lie. He looked from the defiant woman to the wounded but unbroken chief and made a choice. "The way I see it," Brody said slowly, "Cortland died in an accidental rock slide. The Apache chief known as the Ghost died in an ambush last week." He crumpled the wanted poster in his fist. "I never saw you, either of you." With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, a solitary figure of justice in a lawless land. They were free. In the profound silence, Josephine knew her old life was gone. "He was wrong," she said softly. "This is my place, with you." Stone looked at her, a deep understanding in his eyes. He placed his sunstone pendant in her hand. "Then come, Josephine," he said, a true smile finally reaching his face. "Let us go home." Together they turned toward the mountains, walking into their future. The story of Josephine Finch and the last Apache prince isn't just a legend whispered around campfires. It's a testament to the unexpected bonds forged in the crucible of the American West. It's a story about how decency can be found in the most unlikely of places, and how true savagery often wears a civilized mask. What became of them? Did they find their hidden valley? Did the people of the Sunstone rise again from the ashes of their past? Some stories are not meant to have a final chapter, their endings carried on the wind, leaving us to wonder about the power of hope against impossible odds. If this incredible story of survival, betrayal, and redemption moved you, please give this video a thumbs up to help us share it with more people. Don't forget to hit that share button to let your friends discover this hidden piece of history. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss another untold story from the annals of the Wild West. Thank you for listening.